Greetings, Mark Quickle, Technical Practice Manager here at Planet Technologies for both our collaboration business as well as our application platform business, which is Azure DevOps, and Azure Data Platform. And I am here in the month of January, very cold month, so therefore I wore my jacket this month to show how cold it's been in the Northeast. To share with you another technical update. This is just a very quick 10-minute video approximately on some new things that are happening in the Azure dev space. And I really appreciate your time and attention today. So let's just jump right in. Let's start talking about Azure DevOps. There were a couple of small updates this month as part of Sprint 144. Probably the most notable was the decoupling of Azure boards and the improvements around GitHub. So this was one of the first largest indications since Microsoft acquired GitHub, and that closed around October. We were just kind of discussing internally in the past week sort of what this means for customers and how we want to position Git versus GitHub specifically. And when I say Git, I'm talking about the Azure Git. And really what Microsoft's trying to do here is build a more tight coupling between Azure DevOps and GitHub. And they're allowing you to actually bring in Azure boards and use those with GitHub projects, which is pretty cool. So now if you're in that space, you have that ability. So all of the sprint planning, Kanban boards, and customized work item tracking can be available to you for GitHub projects. And as you commit code in GitHub or you initiate pull requests, you're able to mention work item contents to link GitHub back to the board work items as well. So that's kind of a cool feature. And GitHub release tasks for Azure Pipelines is officially here. Teams that are using Azure Pipelines to build code in GitHub will see the work items linked to their GitHub commits in the build summary. Just kind of another interesting change with release 144 was the public release of ServiceNow integration with Azure DevOps. And with this capability, you can specify ServiceNow as a release gate and then operationally manage your change management process through the ServiceNow interface. In the past, you could do that, but you had to do it through code developed custom extensions. And now, your life just got a bit easier if you're working with ServiceNow. So we have a few customers that actually use ServiceNow pretty regularly. And so this is kind of just another great value add for Azure DevOps. Okay, on the development front, last month we talked about Visual Studio going into public release, and now release 2 is here. With it, there were a couple of small enhancements. I'll say small enhancements. Any new features are kind of nice, but there were some performance improvements, some UI improvements. There were code-related changes for C++ and F#. And if I had to pick, I usually like to pick one thing that's kind of the most interesting to me. So if I had to pick anything that was the case with this release, it would have to be the new background download process for updates. So with this release, you will be able to download updates silently in the background and then apply those. And I know that will help in all the cases where I've had that little yellow flag in Visual Studio 2017, and developers, my peer developers have often reminded me that means I'm ready for an update. With it, .NET Core 3 Preview 2 also was announced and actually just came out, I think it was January 29th was the date, so not just a few days ago. With it came C# 8 and in preview, and with it there's some syntax changes there, such as using declarations and switch expressions. I'm actually not running Preview 2 yet, but I am looking forward to giving it a try and seeing how that goes. Also, quickly as an update, and about 2 months ago, I guess, I had a part of my video blog talking about Azure Graph Data Connect, the preview service, And I just wanted to announce that I put together sort of a how-to blog article for those of you that are interested in giving it a try. There's a couple of gotchas, and I work directly with the Microsoft team to sort of get through it. If you follow just the step-by-step directions on their site, I think that there's a couple of pieces that are missing. So I try to kind of fill in those gaps and put them out there. And so, if you get an opportunity, go out and check it out and give me your feedback. I'm really interested in hearing it. If there is an opportunity for us to get to the graph data easier and manipulate it, we always love taking advantage of that. Next, I wanted to take a few minutes. We're talking about the dev content here to talk about SharePoint Framework. And for those of you that are kind of new to SharePoint Framework, I just wanted to kind of talk about what it is. If you look at the Microsoft definition for SharePoint Framework, it says it is a page and web part model that fully provides support for client-side SharePoint development, easy integration with SharePoint data, and support for open source tooling. So I think it's a fairly decent definition. We actually have seen a huge uptake in SharePoint Framework, but it has required, in our particular case, some adjustment internally, because we are Microsoft developers who've been developing with Microsoft technologies since the 1990s collectively, and we've used SharePoint for a long time, and so we're very familiar with the sort of C# style web parts that you develop in Visual Studio and you deploy, and we also are strong in JavaScript and so on and so forth. So we've been working with the code editor web parts and other types of things over the past several years to enhance SharePoint's capabilities. Well, with the modern capabilities, Microsoft's moved into the SharePoint framework, and in the I don't think it's the language adoption that's been a challenge for us as much as the tooling is very different. You're no longer working with Visual Studio templates. You're kind of doing everything through the command line, using Yeoman, Gulp, other tools like that. You're deciding whether you want to use complete straight-up JavaScript for your UI, or you can use the React framework components that are out. So it has been an adaptation for us, and it's certainly an adaptation for our customers. We do about 130 SharePoint projects on a given year, somewhere in that range in this team. And of those, we have folks who want to do branding. We have folks who want to just do things like have SharePoint modern and be able to do search-based navigation, which isn't available right now. So we have to be creative in how we approach those particular solutions, and in a lot of cases SharePoint Framework is that answer. So we do have developers here who specialize in it, and we've seen our adoption increase as the increase of modern has, and so that's super important. I think that's reflected in some of the latest statistics I've seen from Microsoft. In fact, they mentioned that the SharePoint Framework adoption was up 581% year over year. Pretty fantastic number. And of course, if other customers are seeing what we're seeing with the adoption of modern, that makes a ton of sense. With SharePoint Framework 1.8 is being released in the upcoming quarter. And with it, there's a couple new features I wanted to just briefly mention here that I think are fundamentally important. One is the general availability of single part app pages. So the ability to take a web part and make it a single page sort of application. That's one of the #1 requested capabilities, and it will be in the new version of SharePoint Framework. General availability of provider hosted solutions in SharePoint. General availability of isolated web parts, and this one's probably my favorite, the Teams development of SharePoint Framework. And if you followed us through our government summit and other events, you would know that Teams adoption is, and the governance around it, how applications are deployed, customization, all those things are hugely important. And so SharePoint Framework is a part of that story now. It's actually out if you're using 1.7. It is available as long as you do your scaffolding with plus beta. You can get the team's capability. And we actually ran some tests here in our environment. There were a couple of little things we had to step over. Nothing too out of the ordinary, but things like you got to be careful about characters in your project name. You have to also be using the correct version of NPM. That is one of the things that we struggle with a little bit because we have a couple of node projects going on that require different versions of it. And so if you have 1.7 or 1.8, just make sure you have NPM and the Microsoft SharePoint generator, a ready-to-go SharePoint environment, scaffold the project. You got to make a couple of slight edits to your SharePoint Framework project to support Teams, and once you have it in, you can now deploy your project to both SharePoint and to Teams as a tab. So it's pretty cool. On this month's data front, I wanted to talk about a new tool that received some updates, and that's Azure Data Studio. It's actually got a name change as well. It's a relatively new tool, and I've been pretty impressed with the amount of updates that it received, and it just got one here in January, and you can see them here on this slide. So when we're talking about it, just because it is kind of a new thing and we're sort of introducing it here, I just wanted to mention kind of what it is. It is a tool first and foremost for data developers, so those that are doing workloads around querying and manipulating data. That's its primary purpose versus, say, administrative. So SSMS, which is a tool that most of us on the data side are very familiar with, is not going anywhere. It will still be a preferred tool on the Windows platform. But the nice thing about these new cloud tools is that they are open source. They're available on GitHub. SSMS is not going open source. And it's cross-platform. So now Linux users and Mac users can get in on the fun as well, connect to both SQL Server and cloud-based data sources and do their querying. Like I said, the new features are visible, but I would highly encourage you, if you are a developer and you are basically using the built-in tools in Visual Studio, you'll know what I'm talking about. They're generally not very straightforward, and they're not super performant. Instead of going through the hassle of installing SSMS, I would highly encourage you to check out this tool and take it for a drive and see what you think. All right, that's all I have for this month. Thank you so much for your attention. Have a great day.